called me from the field and said, there are lots of dead bats. And I said, what do you mean by lots of dead bats? Hundreds, thousands? He said, oh yeah, many thousands. Wow. So there are bats dead on every rock that's sticking out of the water. There's dead bats. There's pieces of bats on the shoreline. There's dead bats hanging on the walls. And they collected some animals, brought them back. And we'd been in the office for several days after that. One of the guys that didn't have a lot of experience said, you know, it was kind of funny, that white stuff that was on them.
I have a confession. I never cared about bats. Instead, they were always just there. I never gave them a second thought. What I did care about, though, were caves. As a recreational caver, I would love nothing more than to spend a weekend underground exploring the karst landforms. But that all changed. One day, all the caves were closed off. I heard murmurings that it was because of some disease that was killing all the bats. White nose syndrome, they called it. Frankly, I didn't care. All that mattered to me was because the bats were dying, my caving days were over. Maybe it was my natural curiosity, or just my stubborn streak, but I wanted to know why the bats were dying and when I could get back underground.
With camera in hand, I left Montana to travel across country to meet with those who are dealing with this disease, to try to figure out what is going on with the bats and what that means for us. I have heard that Tennessee was on the front lines for white nose syndrome. Corey Holliday, the Cave and Karst Program Director for the Nature Conservancy, invited me to check out some of the work he and his colleagues were conducting to monitor the bats in the state.
White nose syndrome is a disease. It's caused by a fungus. It's relatively rare for a fungus to be a primary pathogen, but in this case it's sort of a perfect scenario where this fungus seems to be introduced from another country. So it's novel to our cave systems. It's a cold-loving fungus, but when you have bats hibernating in these caves, there's sort of a little packet of living tissue and cells for this fungus to grow on, and they're torpid, they're in hibernation, so their immune systems are totally suppressed, so they have really no natural defenses against something like this.
Why should we care about the bats? Like, why are they important to us?
Bats are the primary predator of night-flying insects, so it's a lot of moths, beetles, mosquitoes, things of that nature. And just here in Tennessee, we're not a relatively large agricultural state, but agriculture alone, they estimate about $313 million a year are the value of bats to humans. The sort of unfortunate thing is white nose syndrome is still very new. We're still struggling to learn more about it, find ways to combat it. So far, we don't really have anything, and it is still spreading and still killing bats at large, immense rates.
What is it about a fungus that causes a bat to die? I traveled to meet with Paul Cryan, a research biologist with the U.S. Geological Survey based in Colorado. Paul has been helping with the white nose response since the disease first emerged.
White nose syndrome is a disease of hibernating bats that in North America caused by the fungus Geomyces destructans. And that fungus gets into the living skin tissues of the bat. Particularly one of the main sites of infection is the wings. The fungus gets in there and just destroys most of the wing tissues. And when the bats are hibernating, that's a really big problem because as far as we can tell, their immune function, the bodily processes that usually fight those kind of fungal infections are shut down because they're hibernating, we think. It's a big question still.
Rolling? All right, sound speeds? Very cool. So yeah, what are your thoughts on bats in general?
They're kind of scary. I have some around my house, and they come out obviously only when it's dark. And sometimes they've flown into my house. That's even scarier.
I don't really care about bats. I don't think about them very often.
My name's Kai, and I think bats are kind of scary because once I saw a picture of them and it was kind of scary.
I enjoy bats. I think they're excellent creatures. I grew up in Austin, so it's kind of a point of civic pride with the bats there.
Some species are going to go extinct, some species might evolve past it, but yeah, really might mess up things, especially in the east with like the farming techniques and everything.
I'm Leo Neal with Radical Roots Community Farm, and we're a certified naturally grown farm that grows vegetables and herbs. So we'll be in a certified naturally grown farm that uses all organic techniques. It's really important to have things that are eating the pests because there's so much life on the farm. So having bats really is one of our strategies. I mean, having beneficial insects and bats being one of those is one huge strategy to keep plants healthy. I think that bats are definitely important to an organic farm's mission and really any farmer's mission if they think about it for a little bit. So I think that it'll be hard to grow food, period, because you need them for pollination. And so to get that tomato plant to produce fruit, they're not going to produce it. And I know that we might try to figure out other ways, but it's not going to be as effective and as magical as the way that nature intended.
In the research realm of things, it's really important to really clearly understand how the disease works. All the steps that lead from the fungal spore landing on a bat's wing to the bat laying dead in the snow. Somewhere in there, there may be a sort of link in the chain that's weak enough that we might be able to break this chain of that leads to mortality, and that offers hope for me. Everybody else who isn't a bat researcher, the first steps towards helping, I think, are this development of a better appreciation for these animals, sort of realizing that they are these beautifully evolved creatures that are unlike anything else we have on Earth, and really starting to, as their populations are wiped out in many cases by white nose syndrome, it's going to be a long road to recovery, and I think more so than now in the future, we're really going to need people being tolerant of bats, and we may need to start sharing our habitats more with them to get these populations back up on their feet, or their wings, I should say.
I used to believe I was completely disconnected from bats. But I now realize that these little critters really do have an impact on our lives. They are not some secondary fixture in a cave, but rather truly fascinating creatures. I know that, like others, I ran the risk of having my misplaced fears and prejudices about these creatures prevent me from truly understanding what our landscape would be like without them. Though white nose syndrome is a tenacious disease, I now see there is hope in the contribution of passionate individuals coming together to give the bats a fighting chance.
Tell me that he smiles on the children's face. Smiles drive the sorrows away. And they tell me that that the fear never comes